Okay, hello, I'm John Neighbors. Came to Windermere in the early 40s as a 5-year-old preschooler. Windermere was a natural paradise then. My father was an avid fisherman, so when he retired for medical reasons, he was attracted to the Butler chain of lakes. He had been previously a Treasury Department agent working with Elliott Ness back in the days of prohibition. He fished regularly until his death was came shortly after that, and I was 12 years old. As a child, we spent the days fishing, swimming, boating, hunting, but these activities were much different than today. When we fished, we did not zoom across the lake in high-powered bass boats. We rowed heavy cypress rowboats with live fish wells in the center, one for bait, one for the catches. We made our own poles from local bamboo for catching shiners and brim, used the old style rods and reels that had frequent backlashes. And when we fished, it was serious because we would clean them and eat them the same day for supper. We ate fish several times a week, which was encouraged by our mothers due to the much harder times economically during the World War II. Bird Island was always teeming with birds. The incredible impression it made on me then is still remembered. During the nesting season, when we explored the island, we literally had to step over the nests of ibis. The trees were so full they had to nest on the ground. Snakes, gators, turtles, muskrats, raccoons, other animals frequently seen on the island. My father told me of hearing panthers scream at night in wooded areas south of Windermere. Even though childhood was a Tom Sawyer-like existence, there were some negative aspects. We had very few residents then, and many of these were retirees and seasonal residents, meaning they were very few other children of my age. Sometimes it was lonesome and frequently boring. At first, we did not have TV, scouts, YMCA, Little League Baseball, or any other organized activities. You had to be self-reliant and creative. There were so few children that the elementary school at Main and Sixth only had 2 rooms for all 6 grades. Some grades only had 4 or 5 pupils. Some of the kids even lived outside of Windermere. One source of occasional entertainment was the potluck suppers. These were held every week at the town hall and usually finished with a cakewalk, a game similar to musical chairs where the final contestant winning the cake baked by one of the civic club members. Usually there was more than one cake. The town hall was the focal point of town activities, and periodically a traveling entertainer or some sort of exhibition would rent the hall and show old movies or for a modest fee, such as Abbott and Costello or a travelogue. We even had a magician, I remember, who escaping from a straitjacket for his final act. Some residents would show movies. I remember my mother showing fishing pictures and cartoons put out by Castle Films and sold in stores. These sessions were well attended. There was nothing else to do. During the era of World War II, and gasoline, sugar, coffee, and other commodities were rationed. You had to have ration stamps to purchase any of these items. Transportation was difficult due to rationing of gas. Most families only had one car, if any, and we had no bus service. So Windermere was pretty much our own world, except for a weekly trip to Orlando for items you could not buy at Paramore or Grice's stores. Even though we were lonely sometimes, the simple, natural lifestyle was good for rearing families, and my overall memories are very positive. I can remember each evening sitting on our porch watching the endless V-shaped lines of water birds returning in the glorious sunsets to their nests on Bird Island and swamps nearby as we prepared our family supper, looking forward to another day. I loved it then and still do. Hello, this is John Neighbors, or John Mills Neighbors, as I was called in the 40s. Came here in 1942 when my father retired from the U.S. Treasury Department because of ill health, and we settled in the town of Windermere. As unbelievable as it sounds today, the town of Windermere had a small dump virtually on the shore of Lake Butler. It was the end of 7th Avenue near where today's Fernwood Park and boat ramp is located. At that time, there was a canal leading in from the lake, which then divided into 2 smaller canals. just wide enough for small fishing boats, and a couple of boathouses were built on them. Just to the south of the boathouses was a couple of ditches where residents could dispose of hard items that could not be burned in their home garbage pits or otherwise disposed of. Because the town was so small in the 40s, there was not a large volume of items being placed there. The canals were a fun place for free-ranging boys to go frog gigging and not so wisely attempting to dig alligators who liked hanging around the canals eating frogs and snakes, which were in plentiful supply. Exploring items from the dump was also a great adventure. All kinds of things were buried, and we would dig them up and try to figure out how we could repurpose them, to use that modern term. I would occasionally bring items home proudly to present my mother as a great gift. She usually humored me by thanking me before storing them in Neverland. I remember two of the most treasured items, which are still in the family somewhere. They were antique irons. One was so old that it was just solid metal placed on the stove or in the fire until it was hot and used to press clothes. The other one was larger with a hollow center and a sliding door used for placing hot coals inside. This one was more modern of the two, as it would stay hot longer. We use them as door stops. Of course, the real surprise from today's point of view is protecting the environment. Why a dump would be allowed on the shore of Lake Butler in the first place. And today that area has been filled in and there's a house where that dump used to be. So interesting that things are so different today, and rightly so. Another interesting thing in those days, which has now become popular in some places again, is people that raise chickens in their backyard for eggs and for cooking. We had a chicken coop or pen across 7th Avenue. It was actually on somebody else's property, which was unimproved woods. And I don't even know if we had permission of the owners or they just lived too far away and never cared. We would go to Palmer Feed Store, which is still there in the same location on West Church Street and is being run by the grandchildren of the original owners. I went to school with the second generation at Edgewater, and they're still my friends today. We would buy baby chicks. You could buy only female chicks because people wanted eggs and nobody wanted a rooster, or if no more than one. I was fascinated that people had jobs of picking up chicks and telling where they were male or female. It still baffles me. Roosters would chase you and try to spur you sometimes when you went to gather eggs, and also would crow early in the morning and wake everybody up. So they were not very popular. Once we got the chicks, you had to buy a starter feed. Then when they got older, they ate regular feed, or you could buy laying feed to encourage egg laying. Once the chicks were large enough to go out of the pen with adult chickens, you had to worry about chicken hawks getting them. We had occasional problems with foxes, skunks, raccoons breaking into the pen for eggs or young chickens. To get the chickens laying, you provided nests with straw and a china fake egg. This encouraged them to start laying. Because times were tough and people did not have extra money, they would make shirts and dresses from the cloth of the feed sacks. The feed companies knew this, so they offered a variety of patterns with flowers or geometric design for use for boys or girls. They actually became somewhat a fad, and kids that could afford shirts wanted them so they could dress like their friends. I remember my mother made me some, which I wore to school. The other slightly more unpleasant duty was to slaughter the chickens for cooking. My dear grandmother, Mother Ward, taught me how to wring a chicken's neck. Of course, her preferred way of killing them. I did it too, but preferred to use a hatchet and chop off the head. Of course, either way, a dead chicken thrashes wildly for 30 seconds or so before going limp, and you can clean it up. Then you brought them into the kitchen, dipped them into boiling water, plucked the feathers off. The next step was cutting it open, taking out the liver, gizzards, all the rest. You could then cut into the familiar pieces of chicken. The best part of this was sit down at the dinner table and enjoy the delicious fried chicken, gravy, biscuits, and whatever vegetables was grown in the backyard.
Curious, you had mentioned going to the feed store all the way in downtown
Mhm.
Orlando,
Yeah.
of kind of what travel was like in the 40s, because
Yeah.
going to
Good
Orlando
question. Good
is
question.
30-minute drive in a car. So right now,
Well, interestingly, this is kind of hard to believe. You had two ways to get to Orlando. One was Old Winter Garden Road, which would take you in, and you would end up on Church Street. You go by what is now the Citrus Bowl and all that. The other way was, we call it 33rd Street, which you would come in through Apopka Vineland area and come in south of town, south of downtown, and hit the Orange Blossom Trail and then drive to downtown. But the way Highway 50 was here, but Highway 50 stopped at Division Street, not Division Street, the street that's just at the end of the last shopping center on Highway 50. And from there to the Orange Blossom Trail, which is about 6 or 7 blocks, was a just clay road that was not maintained and had giant holes in it. Or you could turn right and go down the street and then hit Old Winter Garden Road and come to Orlando. But it was years and years after we got here that there was no connection between Highway 50 and Colonial Drive. And unfortunately, when they connected them, Colonial Drive was one of the most beautiful streets in Orlando because it had live oaks the whole length of it, and they had to cut those live oaks down because they had to make a 4-lane road to accommodate and it became Highway 50 through Orlando. So that was the good and the bad of going to Orlando. But it didn't take that long because there was no traffic. I mean, Orla Vista was the only place between Windermere and downtown Orlando. I could get to Orlando in 20 minutes. I can't do that today. So even though things were much more primitive, it didn't take you longer to get to Orlando. And of course, Orlando, there were no shopping centers. You know, when we moved here, everything was downtown. So the big deal was 5 and 10 cent store, dime stores, whatever you want to call them. And there were probably 5 or 6 of them within the 2-block downtown area, Cress, McCrory's, and they all had lunch counters where you could eat lunch. And that was like a mini department store. I mean, they would sell everything from, baby turtles, live turtles, to kitchen utensils. They didn't sell clothes, but they sold everything else. And then there were pawn shops, banks, and 4 movie theaters in downtown Orlando, which are 1 now, I guess. So it was a very compact way to shop and so forth. The other thing, from a social standpoint, is this was during the days of segregation, and everything was very segregated. The story about lunch counters, integration lunch counters and so forth. This was before the integration. So, there were no African Americans eating in downtown. However, and I find this very interesting, West Church Street, which was the area of the central part of the black section of Orlando, the business section, there were a lot of very prominent, successful business lawyers, food stores, movie theaters. In fact, there was a fish market there that my mother, we always went there to get fish. And then Palmer Food Store, which is not that same area, which still exists today. So, obviously nobody wants to go back to segregation, but there was a very thriving Black business community in Orlando, separate and apart from the core of downtown Orlando. Good news, bad news. The good news is that there were some successful business.
Right.
The bad news is they were segregated. I'm going to talk about, guns and kids, because it's a bad day to talk about after some of the things in the paper. But growing up in a rural area in the 40s was a lot different than today's urban and suburban communities. By the time a boy was 5 or 6 years old, someone in the family had given him a pocket knife. They were usually small ones with only 2 blades, or sometimes the larger ones. But we spent most of our time fishing with hunting thrown in, and you needed a knife to cut the fishing line or whittle a piece of wood or build a slingshot. Or as you got a bit older, you probably joined the Cub Scouts or later the Boy Scouts. One of my prized possessions was a green handle Boy Scout knife, multiple cutting blades and other blades for doing things like removing screws and so forth. Boys always wanted a hunting knife. They were impressive with leather handles and up to 6-inch blades, usually a leather sheath to attach to your belt so you could walk around like a frontier scout or a great hunter. Sometimes we tried to become skilled at throwing them at a tree 20 or 30 feet away and having a stick in blade first, like the cowboy and Indian movies we saw. Usually end up doing damage to the knife and soon gave up on that idea. So we played Mumbly Peg and other games that you flip in the dirt, um, but were not really dangerous. And then, of course, as you got older, you got a BB gun. Everybody seemed to have a BB gun. And then shortly after, your family would usually give you a real gun. Usually it was a 22 rifle, which were inexpensive, and the ammunition was very cheap. At this point, you had an adult male in the family or close friend, which would educate you on the proper use of the firearms. This is when you took your gun seriously and felt like you'd grown up. They were used primarily for target practice, but also to shoot squirrels and maybe a rabbit if your family liked to eat them. Everyone in town considered it normal to see a teenage boy or two walking through town carrying their rifles. Most adult males had pistols for home protection, but never used it because in those days you didn't need any protection. People left the keys in their cars parked outside of their houses overnight, and most folks didn't even lock their doors at nighttime. Another back in the days before we had television and social media and all those things, kids had to kind of make their own games, but they also had radio programs. And the radio programs, this was before television, were adventure programs, Sky King, The Lone Ranger, so forth. And they all were sponsored seemingly by cereal companies. Saturday morning, we would all gather around the radio and listen to 3 or 4 of these programs in sequence, like Superman, Green Hornet, Captain Preston of the Yukon, The Lone Ranger, so forth. One of our favorites, the Sky King, who uses airplane to fly around fighting evil lawmakers. But what made his show a favorite is you could mail in a small amount of money, pocket change, an amount along with a box top of the cereal of his sponsor and get special prizes. The most memorable was a ring that glowed in the dark. I remember spending the night with my good friend Ray Duncan and spending half the night talking about this amazing ring. It had a secret compartment. It had a miniature ballpoint pen. It would recharge itself in the light and then glow for an hour or so afterwards. It also had a embossed recess you could press onto hot candle wax to make an image of a special crest or logo of Sky King. When I arrived in Windermere as a boy in 1942-43, there was no bus service to or from Windermere. The closest point to catch a bus to Orlando was where Gotha Road met Old Winter Garden Road. There was a tavern on the corner. While in junior high school in the early 50s, I used to catch a ride with different businessmen who worked downtown to Orlando and walk a few blocks to Memorial Junior High, which was on the shore of Lake Eola. One of the businessmen was J.B. Dyer, who had 2 sons and drove a classic Jaguar. Talk about riding in style. We did that for a while anyway. After school, I would walk to the old Orlando Transit Company station, 1/2 block east of Orange Avenue on Wall Street, and catch the Winter Garden bus to the Gotha location mentioned above, where I would get off the bus, wait under a shade tree by the tavern for my mother to come pick me up and return home in Windermere. She was working at the post office for the first half of the day. The bus driver was named Mr. Hastings, I believe, and everyone called him Hasty. He was very well known to most of the people in Windermere who worked on that route. And many years before his retirement, I think the newspaper wrote an article about him at the time. The lack of bus service to Windermere was a hot topic and frustrating one for the civic leaders in town because of frequent requests and pleas were never able to get the Orlando Transit Company to schedule regular bus service to Windermere. Well, hurricanes are around, have been around for a long time and are still around today, obviously. But in the 40s, we seemed to have numerous hurricanes. We didn't have TV or smartphones or radar images to advise us in detailed ways as where the storm was and what it was coming. the newspapers sometimes printed maps, but of course, by the time you got the newspaper, the storm might be in a slightly different location. But people would clip out the hurricane map and mark it and put it up on their wall. And you listen to the radio to get coordinates to mark your map. So that was the highest tech available at the time. My father, even though he was among the bravest men I knew since he was in World War I and injured there and received a Purple Heart and worked for the Treasury Department, helping to put Al Capone behind bars. He was in poor health as a result of those jobs, and his doctors ordered him to avoid enduring too much stress. So after the first couple of hurricane seasons, he would have us pack up the car and move to a tour spot away from the main path of the storm. However, before he made that decision, we stayed at home. The most terrifying experience I had was when the storm struck at night. No moon or stars to provide light, just blackness and no electricity, and a roaring loud noise of the wind and rain. I can remember one night having to go out and in the peak of the storm to reattach a storm shutter we had made to protect the windows from being blown out or broken. There I was in the pitch dark, hammer and nails, trying to stand up, leaning against the wind and feeling around for the proper position to nail the boards while having the occasional light of a lightning bolt, and equally bad hearing limbs flying through the air nearing my head and roof shingles flying by my head. Of course, the next day was always bright and sunshiny, but the town always looked like a war zone with downed trees, branches, and so forth, which we have today. But many roads were impassable, and there was really no town department to take care of those things. So it took quite a while to clean the roads up, and also it took a lot longer to get electricity back. So, but everyone helped each other as best they could. During World War II, and we've talked about rationing before, it was a different environment. The nation was consumed with support for the war effort. Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor and invaded China and Korea. Germany, Hitler invaded the neighboring countries in Europe. Atrocities were being perpetrated. Our future existence as a free country was imperiled. As a result, our fathers, brothers, sisters, and neighbors all enlisted in the armed services and entered the conflict. Scrap metal was a valuable commodity in the war effort. People saved everything made of metal. Tin cans, junk cars, used items, any kind were saved and taken to recycling centers. At that time, almost everyone smoked cigarettes. Men, women, and late teenagers all smoked. Cigarettes were less than 20 cents a pack, but were rationed so that soldiers could have first chance at the supply. The cigarette packages were lined with tinfoil backed with paper. The tinfoil was mostly lead. Our family and many others would save all the empty packs and periodically would gather around a table or sit on the floor with a bowl of water and soak the wrappings in the water until the paper backing on the tinfoil could be carefully peeled away, leaving only the thin metal. The strongest person would then squeeze one or two of the small metal sheets together to make them into the smallest possible tiny solid ball. Then one sheet at a time, new layers were squeezed over it until the ball gradually grew into 4, 5, or 6 inches thick, lead ball weighing several pounds. It took a lot of sheets. The ball would be saved and taken to the recycling center to be remanufactured in bullets, bombs, tanks, planes, etc. And I just recently, I had one of these balls that I saved in the family, and I have recently donated it to the Winter Garden History Museum. And last time I went over there, it was on display in one of the cases. So interesting.
Let's go check that out.
Yeah, I used to have fun with it because I would ask people, "What is this?" And they would all say it's a cannonball.
Right.
And when you look at it, you can't believe it's made out of cigarette paper backing, which they probably still use
cigarettes.
Oh yeah, well, people smoke 2 packs a day or something.
So you would take that ball in and get paid for recycling it when you say
no, they didn't. No,
okay.
Nobody. Everybody did it free.
Okay.
They didn't
So it's kind of a contribution.
It was a patriotic thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Rather than just throw the cigarette packs away, somebody figured out that you could use this if people all over the country did it, it would be tons
Right.
of metal that, like I say, everybody saved everything and recycled everything. Recycling day is nothing compared to what it was during World War II.
Right.
Everything was recycled. They could be recycled, but of course, the technology was not as good in those days. Another thing that we had back in the day that you don't see now is dredge holes in the lakes, because dredging has basically been outlawed like in the Butler Chain or other freshwater lakes, because it was considered damaging in that when you dredge, it creates a colloidal suspension because there's a little bit of clay in the soil that you're dredging out of the lake. In fact, we used to make ashtrays out of it. You dig around and find kaolin. It's called kaolin. It's a type of clay. But when you dredge and it goes through an impeller or something in the dredge, it breaks down and somehow combines it with the water. And it's only temporary, but like a beautiful clear lake, like Lake Butler when I was a kid, would suddenly turn like a greenish color that you could only see like 6 inches. And it would stay that way for a day or two before it all settled out. Because the sand was put up on the beach and it ran back in, it perceived to be destroying some of the native plants around the edge. So it was eventually outlawed. But my cousins were in the dredging business. They lived on Lake Butler. So anyway, I want to talk a minute about dredge holes. During the 40s and 50s, before it was banned legally, the lakefront property owners used to hire small dredging companies to pump white sand from the lake bottom to create or expand a beach. Some houses did not have white sand in front of their house, so they would create a white sand beach by doing this. Anyway, my uncle's family, the Wards, were in the business. They had homemade dredges, including one built on a converted Navy duck, which was an Army surplus or Navy surplus truck, could be driven on the road or also in the lake. Basically, a dredge consists of a gasoline or diesel engine powering a 4 or more commonly a 6-inch diameter centrifugal pump. There was an A-frame type of structure that pivoted vertically to lower and raise the suction pipe that pulled lots of water and sand through a long series of pipes stretched along the shore, floated from the dredge to the shore to discharge on the shore. The result of dredging was a nice white sand beach and a large hole at the bottom of the lake, or maybe multiple holes, where the lake water turned a turgid aquamarine color in the area dredged. This would dissipate, or if it didn't dissipate quickly, copper sulfide was cast upon the water to bind up the solids and return the lake to clarity. Of course, copper sulfate is a poison, and for that reason, the practice of dredging was banned. The benefit of dredging to young boys like me at the time was to find the holes, dive down to the bottom, which were much deeper than the natural bottom. Fish also liked them because the water was cooler there in the hot summers. One of the favorite activities was to make spear guns from bamboo with strips of rubber from an old inner tube for power, and a sharpened welding rod as a spear. This type of spear gun is referred to as a Hawaiian sling. These were used to spear bass and brim to be eaten that night for supper. We found out later that spearfishing is illegal in freshwater, but I don't think we got enough fish to do any damages. One of the more questionable activities that we had to entertain ourselves back in the day was we found out that you could make black gunpowder, which was used, during the Revolutionary War, by muskets and so forth, by going to the drugstore and buying 3 over-the-counter ingredients. One was saltpeter, the second was sulfur, and the third was charcoal. If you mix those 3 items together, you have black powder. So we would make black powder, then we would get a metal galvanized pipe of, an inch in diameter maybe, and drill a hole in the top of it so that we could put a fuse to light it, and then put a cap on the back so that the blast would go out the proper end. And we would find things to use as projectiles. For example, our favorite item was my friend had his parents had a device to carbonize drinks. So it had CO2 cartridges, which are about 2 inches long and just small enough to fit into the pipe.
Mhm.
So we would make cannons out of the pipe. And he had 2 horses and a horse barn over on First Avenue. And we would fire one of the, well, not when the horse were there, we would fire one of those things and it would go through 4 walls before it stopped. So they were very powerful. So, as soon as our parents found out about it, we were greatly discouraged from doing that. But and here's a confession I'll make about ammunition and explosives. When my cousins, the Ward boys, left town with their frequently moving father and mother, recall they were the ones that were in the dredging business. Johnny had a last minute gift he left me. He had several sticks of dynamite left over from their days in the dredging business, which they used as part of their contract with the county to clear the canals in the Butler chain of lakes. The canals had grown up with trees and made it difficult for the new larger boats to pass through each other in the canal. The best way to get rid of them was to blow them up from the roots and cut up the logs afterwards. So when they left, Johnny gave me about 6 or 7 sticks of dynamite in a brown paper bag. I put them in my desk drawer in my room. My mother had never had reason to check my desk, and I forgot about them since I did not need to blow anything up for the next several years. He also gave me caps, fuse caps, which were necessary to set off the dynamite, but they were kept separate, so they weren't embedded in the dynamite. But dynamite in those days, and probably still today maybe, was made by soaking wood chips or sawdust with nitroglycerin. Of course, nitroglycerin is, it can be set off by a shock, but when it's diluted and in sawdust, if you drop a stick of dynamite, it's not going to go off. After a few years of that, I was either in high school or I can't remember high school or in college, but I opened up the drawer they were in and saw the dynamite was still in there, and the brown paper bag was very damp. I looked inside, and to my great concern, the wax paper which held the dynamite powder in place was dripping wet. So I knew that this was nitroglycerin, which is what gave the dynamite its explosive power, but it's a very dangerous subject on its own. It can blow up with a sharp drop or shock. So I had to get rid of this. So after thinking long and hard about how to get rid of stuff without telling my mother or anyone else for fear of getting in trouble, I decided there was one place and no one would ever find it and would not cause an accident, the bottom of Lake Bessie. So I borrowed a rowboat, rowed out in the middle of the lake, took the brown paper bag in a larger cloth bag with some rocks, lowered it over the side, and dropped to the bottom of Lake Bessie. Not too long after that experience, a similar adventure I had, an older friend named Ronnie Valin, who they lived over on Lake Down, was old enough to drive and had a Model A Ford, and a very bad leak in the radiator. We would go to drive-in theaters in on Orlando because they were cheap, and this was before TV had arrived, nothing to do in the evening. So we had to carry 2-gallon jugs of water because if we did not stop and add water when it ran low, it would boil over, and we'd have to wait for the engine to cool down. Well, Ronnie enlisted or got drafted and served in Korea. When he came home, like a lot of soldiers, he brought home souvenirs. He had Japanese kimonos, military clothes of all sorts, toys, etc. But one of the most unusual items he had was a container of 50 caliber machine gun shells. These were impressive cartridges about 6 inches long. Fortunately, we did not have a gun to shoot them, but we would occasionally pull the top brass off projectile and empty out the gunpowder and use it in our homemade cannons to fire CO2 seltzer bottle cartridges as projectiles. They were quite powerful and go through the trunk of a small tree. I was happy to say that we never hurt anybody. But history repeated itself, so we got tired of the games, and I've had to figure out what am I going to do with the remaining 50 caliber machine gun shells for a couple more years until I rediscovered them and thought, I have to get rid of these things. I'm not supposed to have them in the first place. Well, you can no doubt guess what I did. Package them up with rocks in a bag headed for Lake Bessie. Again, borrowed a rowboat, went out in the middle of the lake, weighted them down and tossed them overboard. So today, somewhere in the middle of Lake Bessie is a bag of dynamite sticks and a bag of live 50 caliber machine gun cartridges, hopefully never to be discovered by anyone, especially young boys like we were looking for adventure.
That's amazing.
We had hydrilla, and so we asked the county, who was going around exterminating hydrilla in some of the lakes in Orlando, if they would come out and survey Lake Bessie and destroy the hydrilla. They said, no, we got too much to do, but if you want to do it, we'll give you sonar, which is the pellets that you drop down. And so they gave us a supply of pellets in a little machine you could stand on the front of the boat and crank them, and it would throw them out. But before that, all of us who lived on Lake Bessie, we're in our 20s or 30s then, we put on our scuba gear, not scuba gear, but our snorkel, and swam the whole shoreline of Lake Bessie, because the hydrilla doesn't grow in real deep areas. It grows up to like 8 or 9 feet deep, maybe. So we did the whole lake to survey where the hydrilla was. And then in fact, there was a picture in the Orlando paper. I've still got the cutout that Susie's husband on the front of the boat and me on the boat distributing this stuff. So we did that around Lake Bessie and got rid of the hydrilla, and it's never been back. We've never had hydrilla since then. Because, Lake Bessie it has a public boat ramp, but it's restricted to Windermere residents. So you don't get a lot of people coming in from the St. Johns River or Lake Tehopekalaga with, hydrilla on the prop or something like that. So it's turned out really good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the boats that typically go in there only go in Lake Bessie.
Yeah.
So where they go on the public ramp at RV Keene or something like that, who knows where they've been.
And I think that's how the hydrilla got into lakes originally, and Lake Butler and so forth.
My name is Eric Graham, and I'm here with my charming spouse, Jeannie. And we also have 2 children, Mary Elizabeth, who lives in the Orlando area over in the other side of town, St. Cloud, as a matter of fact. And then we have a younger son who lives with his family in Taiwan, and he teaches over there. So the origin of us arriving in Windermere was, at the time I was working up in Cleveland at Ohio Bell Telephone, and read an article in our industry newspaper that AT&T, as a result of an antitrust suit, was going to locate the folks that would be involved in the case in Orlando. And so I applied to be transferred down here. Interesting enough, there were 25,000 applications, and they only had 800 openings. Everybody wanted to come to Orlando. And I was one of the fortunate ones who was accepted. Primarily, the priority was a couple reasons. The fact that my family, both my parents and my brother and family, had retired from the Bell system and lived in the Clearwater area. And secondly, it was a great time for moving to another position. I was ready to do something different. And believe me, antitrust work was so far different from normal telephone work. It was very interesting. So when we came down here, we had a local realtor friend back up in Ohio. And because she was part of a franchise, she identified a person of the same franchise down here in the Orlando area and got us connected that way. And as a part of that, Jeannie and I came here. Probably we were visiting my parents at the time, and we came up here, met with the lady realtor, and she was taking us around this side of town because this is where the work was going to be, over off of near Sand Lake Road. And so I wanted a short commute. I had no interest in going up into the Altamont area and so on, and using I-4 as an interstate. I'd had enough of interstates commuting to Cleveland and so on. So as a result of that one-day tour, she said, I'm just going to drive you through this little town. And we had visited several other locations over off of Apocov Island, Conroy, Windermere. And of course, nothing was like it is today. There weren't a ton of developments. There were some.
Newer homes, but not a lot.
Yeah. So as we hit Windermere, and it was beautiful. We came in Conroy, Windermere. There were groves everywhere. It was in the fall, I think November. And the scent of oranges was everywhere. Just a lovely environment. And we started to see the lakes as we approached Windermere. And she said, just to forewarn you, there's no property for sale here. But I just wanted you to be aware of the locale and so on. To compact the story, we loved the area. And the next day on our own, we returned in a rental car and said, we want to find a property here.
Yeah.
We've already been told there isn't anything available.
Yeah.
But my wise wife said, why don't we talk to a couple locals? And we were driving up and down Main Street and find out what they would recommend. And we did just that. And she talked with a couple of folks that were just walking on the sidewalk. And they said, oh, you need to go to Windermere Improvement. You'll meet there probably with Johnny Luff and Mr. McMurtry.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody knows real estate in this area, it's them. So that's what we did. And now I'm going to let my wife talk.
And what year was that?
1979. That's an important question.
Well, actually, 1978.
Well, it was fall of 78.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then basically, Eric, we toured everything, and we loved the railroad track, and we loved the little store, and they would tell us stories about how the men would leap off of the train and get food, and then continue on down to the drop-off spot. I can't think what the name of it is right now. But anyway, we fell in love with the town. Just everything about it. We ate at Johnny Luff's little restaurant one time, and Cope's hardware store, and just everything. We lived out in the country so many times. This, not being able to be in the country, this was country to us because there wasn't that much around, but it had this sweet little town, and this train that would go up and down. And I went back home, and well, Eric went home too, and then he back to Ohio. He had to come down and start working. So while he was down here working, he proceeded to make contact with Johnny Luff.
That would have been January of 79. So I traveled down here. I was working out of a Holiday Inn close to my work situation. But I kept in touch with Johnny. I think it was on a telephone call one day. He said, would you be willing to wait for a home if one came available in Windermere? Would you be willing to wait? And I said, yes, I think so. I said, how long? He said, about 6 months. So he said, why don't you come out? I'll arrange for you to tour the home, take a look at it. And I did. It was on the northeast corner of 3rd and Palm, which is catty corner from where Johnny and his wife at the time lived. It was a family residence. I think it had been his grandfather's place.
Probably several houses were relatives at one time.
And it was right across, well, the home faced on Lake Butler. And right across the street was another older home, which C.T. Allen now presently owns.
And that, I think, was one of the founding people's homes. I'm not too sure. And then where the Wrights lived, it was a gray house on the corner of Butler and 3rd. Those 3 homes definitely belonged to one of the families.
So had a nice tour of the house, met the owners, the Greens, and they were building a condo, I believe, in West Palm Beach, which was going to be available in about 6 months. I liked the floor plan. It was perfect for us, a split bedroom deal, 2 baths, about 2,100 square feet. At that, I think the asking price was a little over 90,000. And also it had, because it was a corner lot, we had a beautiful view
Oh, the view.
of Butler, which we never had to be concerned about the taxes because we didn't have lakefront, but we still had the view. Interesting enough, piggyback on what Jeannie said about liking the area and so on, and reminding us of the country. We've never owned a home where we had public water or a sanitary system. We've always had the septic tank and a drilled well. So the Windermere fit right into what we knew. And so
minus the acreage.
So here I am down here, and I want to communicate with Jeannie. I real quick drew a floor plan and it sent it to her, along with a telephone call and letting her know that I've been in this home. I'm describing it to her as best I can. And of course, it had orange trees like all the properties in here. It had orange trees in their backyard because everything here had been a former grove. She said, go for it.
Yep.
So we made an
Sight
offer.
unseen. For
And,
me.
yeah. And
He did.
yeah, it was accepted. And then Johnny was so good to us. We never have figured out why.
I don't
He
understand why.
was, it's not that, people have always been friendly and kind to us, but he went overboard. He even
He
arranged
really was.
for a get together at his home across the street where we got to meet some of the many folks in Windermere, and it was a very enjoyable evening. And then he took me aside one day and he says, by the way, there's a property down on Butler that you might be interested in as an investment. If you recall, down there, just before you get to the boat ramp, there's a split lot, and there's two like cottages on that split lot.
Lovely little
It would be
cottages.
on the east side of Butler. And he said, they're asking 42.5. Now, here I am, the brilliant doofus. I said, I'm going to carry a mortgage down for the other home, and I just didn't think in those terms of having a investment home. 42.5 today looks like. Let me shed a couple of tears for 42.5. I think Zillow is listing those properties for close to 400,000 now. And anyways, that was a little sideline of the story. We were very graciously welcomed. It turned out it wasn't a 6-month wait. Jeannie and my daughter, Mary Elizabeth, Sean hadn't arrived yet, came down, and we moved into a rental property right over
Main
here
Street,
on
yes.
Main Street.
Next to the art studio.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the second house from the art studio.
Yeah, going to
I
south.
can't remember the name of
It
the
was
family.
brand new,
Johnson's,
2-bedroom,
I
1
think.
bath.
Yeah.
And so we were the first ones to rent there. And we closed on May.
I want to go back to the town when we came here.
Yeah, that's what I'm because you guys said that something attracted you. It was the
Krups owned the hardware store, and what a hardware store that was. And having our own post office, large. Okay, now the old post office is the old Marshall's antique store when we came in. Okay. And before that, it had been a post office, and I don't know who ran that. But there was also a dress shop in town. And I wish I could remember. I want to say it was the Sims. Well, I shouldn't use the name because I can't remember that. But there was a dress shop in this little town. First person I ever met was Roger Seidner. He came down to the rental place and introduced himself from the Windermere Church. And of course, it was little. And of course, Baptist Church was very small too. But the quaintness of the town and was very precious. Absolutely. And the smell of the orange blossoms. You looked forward to that. Every year was that. And then just a lovely, no grocery store close by. You had a little shop that you could go buy bread and milk and so forth. And the people were just nice. There were wonderful artists here.
Yes.
Wonderful art, and I wished I could remember their name. And all the little girls on Second Avenue had horses. And fortunately, my daughter liked horses. And the Guest family built a barn up by the old airport that was there. And it was a glider airport, I believe. I don't think it was
Where was that, huh?
on Moore Avenue and McGuire on the corner where Publix is.
Okay.
But it was an old airport, and they built a barn back there, and the kids that had horses that did board there were able to ride into town without any traffic. And they would go to Dr. Fields and Marilyn Fields' home on Second Avenue, and the horses would jump off of the ledge and they would go swimming in Lake Butler. But there were almost all the girls in Second Avenue had horses up at a stable that's up in Winter Garden. I can't remember the name right now, but anyhow, it was an ideal place for my daughter because she loved horses, and that was the Guest family when they built that barn back there. Now it's all developments, but the kids were allowed to ride through the groves. Nobody ever complained. There used to be a railroad track that went through there someplace. I don't know exactly. But when she was little, it was a marvelous town and a good school. Very proud of the schools. Then we had a young boy born in 1984. So we started all over again, but no, what a great place to raise our kids.
Did they go to Windermere Elementary, where it's currently located?
Lakeview and West Orange. Now, when Mary was in school, she had an opportunity, I think it was Mary or was it Sean, to go to Olympia. And they both had stayed at West Orange. And Sean eventually ended up at Rollins, and Mary ended up at Valencia. Both got degrees, different areas, but their education was very good. They had very good education.
You had mentioned the railroad caught your eye when you came through, so it was still running at the time, I guess, until
It was.
early
Yes, it was.
early
You could
80s.
hear it coming down. Yes, that was so neat. That really was neat. And then living here for a short, they would say they would stop off at the corner where the post office was, and evidently there was a little store there. And I know there was a dress store in that area too, and they would get some snacks and then they'd get back on the train and off they go.
Walt Disney only had one park when we arrived here.
Yes.
The Kingdom. They were building Epcot. And the railroad then was very active in going down to the Rinker concrete plant, which was further down on Apocov Island. It was a big plant. So they were bringing almost daily 2 or 3 boxcars or a tanker or something, supplies for Rinker. And Epcot opened in October of '82. So I believe probably shortly thereafter, the railroad started to pull up stakes. Mm-hmm. And I know that they offered their land to the town initially. And eventually
different families did buy portions of it.
Exactly. One of the things that I wanted to mention was that as a result of attending the church, I met Fred Getchie. And Fred Getchie and his wife and family, they moved to Windermere in '57. And he told me stories about Windermere then. For example, he said there was no Conroy Windermere. He said you could drive down so far and it just became a dirt road. He said if you wanted to go to downtown Orlando, you had to go north up on Main Street and then jog over and finally connect up with Old Winter Garden Road. And he said it was an all-day journey to get to downtown Orlando, do your shopping, and then to get back to Windermere. One of the things he told me that I still have difficulty believing, it just seems,
He would have a
Yeah,
lot of good
yeah.
stories.
But he said the railroad at that time connected all the way down to Kissimmee. And he said it wasn't unusual for the wives to get on the train. They had a passenger car and they would take it down to Kissimmee to shop and then come back on it.
Yeah.
And in 1957, I guess that was possible.
Yeah.
He told me very distinctly about there was a swim club that he belonged to. Susie Carr was one of the members of it. And the Big Long Lake, there was a club where they went to do their swimming and boating and so on. So he talked about, that was one of their many activities here. He worked for Martin Marietta. He was a former Navy guy, and he worked for Martin Marietta and their missile program and so on. And they lived in Germany for a while, and then stationed
Long
in
Island.
Guam in the Pacific.
Yeah,
But
learned how to.
yeah, he would have marvelous history.
Oh, he really would.
So you left Bell South or
Ohio Bell.
Yeah.
to go to Epcot? Is that where you?
No.
you worked
I
oh,
moved from AT&T
okay.
in '87.
Okay.
I was able to, after the antitrust suit ended in '83 with the breakup of the Bell system, I was able to get a job in internal auditing here and finished up my career then.
Okay.
Left in March in '87, and then for 5 years, basically, while Jeannie went back to work. At that time, Sean was 3 years old and was going to the Windermere preschool. So Dad became,
Dad,
mom for a while.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful experience because most times fathers are busy working while mom's raising the kids. So I got the wonderful experience and opportunity to be a part of Sean's life in his early years. But then I had a friend from church, Bob Berensky, who retired from Sears and came down here, Sears Roebuck. And then he latched on to Disney. And he was in Disney security, and he kept telling me, "You're retired now, you need to be doing something." And he was after me. So finally in '93, I went down to casting and got a job working as a temporary. In those days, you work 3-4 days a week, but now it's just 2 for temporaries. And Epcot just became my home base. Initially, I mean, you could talk all day about the Disney experience, especially in the early years, but I started out doing you'd get a weekly schedule, and I was working all 3 parks, including the studios. They didn't have Animal Kingdom then.
Right.
And eventually, after a couple of years, I just got permanently stationed at Epcot, which is a nice commute. Yeah, in security. And
this is a numbers cruncher, and he's in security, pointing out the restrooms.
well, it's a great experience because when you're walking along, some people say, "How can you be in the midst of all those people," and so on? But there's something about it that just you have the knowledge. They're coming to you asking questions. Where's this? Where's that? And so on. And I think it's good for the little gray cells. As you get older,
you need to do something.
Yeah, if you're going to retire to something, not to a lazy boy.
Right.
And a six-pack.
Yeah.
So when I came down here, I started coming down in 2003, and of course the roundabouts were put in just after. So traffic was essentially here.
Yeah.
Did you guys notice a change in Windermere with traffic, or whatever it may be? Some sort of change at Windermere? Was it just overnight, or
gradual?
Just gradually?
It was gradual. And then when they decided to put the roundabouts, if you ever lived in New Jersey, you knew what a roundabout was. Okay. They would be maybe 3 sections of it that would go around, and you just had to work your way around to the street you wanted. And the roundabouts, I don't think really improved our town. I think the stops stop signs did better. But yeah, the traffic changed, and now you don't go out at 9 o'clock in the morning. You just you run right into traffic. And they did, I'm not too sure about this, but they did have an opportunity to say no to traffic coming through Windermere, but they chose, I don't know how that happened, but they chose to let it come through. But there was another route that they could have used. So I was a little disappointed that they didn't take the other route. But we had some nice stores, and church people, both at the Baptist Church and the Windermere Union, they were all lived in this area. They didn't come from outside. They all lived here.
So the Union Church, was that still open when you were here? or-
Oh, yes,
Yeah, very much
yes.
so.
Roger Seidner was the minister there, and it eventually did change hands, but it was just a nice, and it had a nice preschool for kids and a sandbox inside. So it was just a nice place. And then there was a family, Grice, Bud Grice. He used to write stories for the Times, not
West
Windermere,
Orange.
West Orange Times. And one day he decided he wrote one about it'd be Pine Street at the end, where it used to be like a fishing camp, but it wasn't a fishing camp. It was a 2-story house with balconies that looked out into the waters and to the under the bridges and stuff like that. That was being sold for a creosote plant. Well, that was a little uproar, but he had this wonderful sense of humor and wonderful ability to write good stories. And I used to love that place because it was like 4 acres of land surrounded by water. I wanted to buy that myself for my daughter so she could have her horse in town. I love that spot. Well, they eventually did sell it to somebody who happened to be an equestrian and had been thrown from her horse going over a jump and was totally crippled. And that's her home. I don't know if she's still alive, but that's where she ended up, and she buying that and had a small home put there and another home put in there. But I love that. I always loved that piece of property, and I think of the creosote plant.
Bud Grice, and I'm trying, the Williams
Williams
family.
family.
And Bud may have been Andy's grandfather, maybe?
I can't tell you. I don't know
Because
the
you've got
connection there, but
Lavina
they're very-
Williams is Andy's mom,
Mhm.
and Andy's dad, who sadly passed a few years back.
Yeah,
But the Grices
we're related.
to
They're
the
related,
Williams,
yeah.
and I don't have the relationship there, but they had the same property, they lived on the same property over there off of Down. And Bud wrote on a regular basis, apparently in the West Orange Times, and as Jeannie said, it was a creosote plant, and he wrote in a very straightforward way. There was no way you would know that there was humor involved in this unless you knew the personality.
And there
So a lot of
was-
people were rushing and calling the town hall of Windermere saying, how dare you do this without a vote, or communicating to the public?
I mean, this part would be rumored to us, okay, but yes.
But then later on, just to show you how he would meticulous he was with his humor, he put a sign up at the driveway on Conway Windermere, the driveway
that's-
back to Lavina's property
Oh,
and
that's.
the Grices.
Oh, my gosh.
This big sign says, announcing soon to come mobile home park.
This is,
And the town went crazy.
Yeah.
You can imagine a mobile home park in Windermere.
these are the people that you dearly loved. They had such a good sense of humor. And they always would sneak this little sense of humor in. And
The town would just say,
they were
the town,
always shocked.
Yeah,
They said, oh, it's just Bud Grice,
Well,
you know, whatever.
there were some people, once they were here a while, they knew.
Yeah.
That's Bud Grice.
I do remember when the Times used to put April Fool's stories in with the
Yeah,
town of Windermere.
absolutely.
I recall one time there was an English person that was pulled over for um, circling the roundabout for 7 hours because the GPS said make a left turn.
That's about right.
This will give you an idea of how bold Bud was. Once in the middle of our church service, he held up his hand, and it was right in the middle of a sermon, and everybody knew it was Bud in the
And everybody loved
sanctuary,
him.
and so the minister looked down and says, "Yes, Bud, what is it?" And he says, "Could you speed it up? We want to beat the Baptists to the restaurants."
We loved him.
Yeah, and that
He brought such
Pure
much
delight.
joy. Yeah. But there were a lot of people like that in this town when we first came. And I know the one man that owned the hardware store, I just loved going there. I love hardwares. Okay, so that was my hangout.
probably
Strange
when you say the big book
that we had.
that we all
Oh, no,
got
yes. I
on
know
the
that.
history of Windermere, which is so well done.
It
Carl
is.
Patterson book.
Patterson book, right?
And they live just down the street from us. And I think they did an excellent job
They did,
of putting
they did.
together the history of the town and bringing it forward.
And there's so many
There.
people in there that you,
Say that
this is our
Windermere
home.
is not only our home,
Yes.
but it's our oasis. And it became
still
clear
is.
to us when you looked at the chain of lakes, we were in kind of a protected area. There was no development that was going to take over Windermere because the land wasn't there. So we could see all this growth going on around us on the other side. For example, when we used to look across Lake Butler, we saw nothing.
There isn't anything.
A street light or something. And now all that frontage is gone to developments. So anyways, we're very grateful.
Yeah, this is our home.
One of our many blessings.
Yes.
That lady realtor in
Said that
1978
there's nothing for
brought
sale.
it, nothing for sale
Nothing
here,
for sale, and
but we locked in on it.
we decided we were gonna come over here some way, and we did. We drove around and just loved everything we saw, and then it was like, what do we do now? We found where we wanted to be, or we could have gone to Windermere Downs, which was more modern and all that, but this was our choice. It was just something, this was us.
My name is Lavina Williams. I came to Windermere in 1968 when I married my husband, Robert Williams, who was a lifelong resident. He grew up here. His father built where the Ready Market is and Tim's Wine. When Bob and I first got married, most people don't know, but we lived in where the Ready Market is, or where Dixie Cream is now. There used to be a little apartment on the Fifth Avenue side, and that's where he and I lived. And then after that, the post office came in, and they were there for, I think, 25 years before they moved out. It wasn't big enough. And then I remember when the country store was here, and when in my apartment on Fifth Avenue at night, the Windermere policeman, Mr. Knight, would sit outside the door, because that was the first time that I'd ever lived not in a neighborhood. And I was young, and it was just different. We had the country store. When I was in high school, we would come after school, everybody would go to the country store. And he had a little restaurant there that you could get hamburgers and milkshakes and whatever. And a lot of us would meet there. A lot has changed. W.C. McMurtry had a real estate office, and that was my husband's cousin, W.C. was. And then Viola, next to his office, where now is going to be Ace Hardware, she had a processing plant that she packed oranges, cleaned them, shipped them out. And that was at Viola. Just, a lot of different things. My husband and them went to the school where these offices are sitting now. And his grandmother also went to school there. And she was a lifelong resident here also. And her sisters, which was Viola and Mrs. Sutton, Selma Sutton, and they all went to school, and they would go over to the little schoolhouse, and they had an aunt that lived next door, and she would fix them lunch when they went to school there. And that was, gosh, back in the 30s or so. And, it's just different. My kids, my son and daughter, all went to Windermere Elementary. My granddaughter went to elementary at Windermere. Bob went to Windermere here when it was here. There's just so many different things that have changed. I lived in a dirt road that an orange grove surrounded us, which is now Jennifer Lane, Rosser Road, everything down by the boat ramp. And I was just secluded back there. His grandparents, I live in a house that was built in 1922 by his grandfather. And so there's just so much that has changed. I miss the dirt roads. So much traffic through town that is so much different than it was back then. It was just, and you had Paramore's grocery store, and everybody went to Paramore's. I don't know if anybody else has told that story or not, but it was where corner of 6th and Main, that big building that's there now. It used to be a little gas station and a little grocery store that Mrs. Paramore sold groceries, and she never left that building except one day to take him to get on the bus for the Army. But she never left. And her nephew, I think, lives down at 6th and Windermere Road, the Armstrongs. We used to have the pancake breakfast. Mayor Rurenheck and I started that. And we would go up and we would decorate. We would get everything for the pancake breakfast, and everybody would come. My husband tells the story back when he was here, they did potluck dinners up there once a month at the town hall. So it's different. I just wish it would go back to what it was. We have the brewery, which I love. I think we've added a lot of nice things on Main Street. Bob's father built the market in 1956 or 7. He built that and where Tim's Wine is. And it remained Ready Market. Jimmy Pitchford out of Winter Garden owned it, the Ready Market portion. And he always had a little place for the managers to live if they wanted to, that managed it. I think his son-in-law finally managed it most of the time. And then the Tim's Wine Market, the Ready Market, when the post office came in, moved over to where Tim's Wine is. And it was there for a long time. And then he just gave it up. And then we came in, we had a florist shop in there. We've had a ski shop in there. And Tim's Wine came in finally, and I think has done a really good job for that. Where the real estate office and all that is, where the real estate office was a garage, a big garage. And Bob started a business in there. We had a big crankshaft grinder, and he had somebody in there that ground crankshafts, and he sold them. And then we built a building in Orlando, and one day we come out and there's a big crane taking this crankshaft grinder out of there. And then it was turned into what is now the real estate offices. But it started out as a machine shop. Bob used to work on cars and stuff. Matter of fact, he used to, when the Ready Market stopped, where everybody sits outside to eat, he used to have all these kind of cars parked there, Porsches and Jaguars and stuff that he would play around with in the shop there and work on them. And then when we got married, I lived in the end, and we lived there, I think, about 6 or 7 months when the post office said post office came in and said they had to have an existing building, use an existing building. So it moved from across the street over to where the Ready Market was. And it was there, like I said, for about 25 years, I think it was. And then when Bob and I took over the shopping center, bought it, and Dixie Cream came in, we owned the house behind it because a lot of the septic system for Dixie Cream is in that backyard. So then we had somebody live there for years. Matter of fact, probably 10, 15, 20 years. Then the brewery decided they needed a place. So we built a building for the brewery. But then recently, Bob and I purchased what is called Johnny's Country Store, which now is Pistol, and then Daryl Nunnally, and then behind it is now Pistol too. But we've had that, gosh, 10 years, I think now. I'd like to buy more here, but Bob is kind of related to a lot of the people here in town. He was back then, because W.C. McMurtry was his cousin. His mom was a sister to my husband's grandparents, his grandmother. There was like 7 girls, and and Bob's grandfather worked the grove in front of our house. Gosh, until he passed away. It was producing orange grove, good fruit. And a lot of this, where Jennifer Lane was also a grove for years, and it was owned by his cousins owned that half. And then they sold off to Jennifer Lane, to Randy Crane, and he developed Jennifer Lane. So I sit in my house and look across the lake. I can remember when there was no houses over there at all. And to see all the houses over there now is a little bit daunting, Years ago, the county was going to condemn that property where the new subdivision is to put a parking lot. So we got the town to annex us in, so they couldn't do that. So there's so much change, and like you say, you've seen a lot of change just in the few years that you've been here. Mm-hmm. And I know that the commercial part of Windermere is from 4th Avenue to, is this 7th, I think, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they won't expand it any more than what it is and keep it small. And I think that's what everybody likes around here, is just the small town. And I'd like to keep it that way. I guess I'm selfish. And I'd like people to remember what it was back then. Your kids could go outside and play and not have to worry about what's going on. And probably Jane will tell you that they used to play till dark. And when the church chimes, bells went at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, that's when they knew to go home.
You probably have recollection. So when you came you guys built the Ready Mart. That was the only thing on that side of the street, probably.
No, there was behind Tim's Wine, and I think there's a picture out here of, there was a little real estate office and a dress shop, and then there was also a little golf cart business there, Ron Welty. And then the Sims girls had a dress shop next door to them. And that was there for years. And also across where Johnny's Country Store, after he opened that one portion up as a little restaurant. And some of the Disney guys opened a little restaurant there. And another thing is, do you know where the roof company is? Behind there?
Mhm.
Chatham's started their first business there. It's a very nice restaurant. Don't know a lot of history on it. I do know that Betty and them and her sons opened this restaurant, and it was there for a long time. And a lot of people, it was an excellent restaurant, and a lot of people like to go to it. And then I think they just outgrew the spot and moved out to over off of Dr. Phillips over there. But Betty Chatham and them lived here in town. Her husband was a doctor, but I knew Betty, and I think she's still alive but lives elsewhere. But they were known for their bananas Foster, which is really good. And also, I don't know if you knew this, but the building in back of there, that little building that was there, was the telephone company when it first started.
Did not know that.
Yeah, years ago. And they've got a little basement underneath there. Can't get to it very much, but there is a basement underneath there. But that was a phone company before they moved down to where they're at now. And I don't know when that was, but I'm not good on times. And then also where Lakeside used to be Judy Black's real estate office. She had in there, and then she moved across the street. And across the street where she was at was SunTrust for years before it moved down to Apopka Vineland and Conroy.
You had described, I guess, where the orthodontist is. That was where the
That's where the little golf cart
Golf cart
and
place.
thing, and then Bob Ferdinand bought it and built it for his orthodontic. I do know that Grice's had a grocery store. And I don't know if that's where our building came into, but years ago, my father-in-law, Bud Grice, his parents had a grocery store there. They served for years there. It was gone before I got here. So I don't know if that was in the 30s or 40s. But I think someone said it was on the property where 5th and Main, where we were. And the church was there, the Union Church. That was the main church before the Baptist church came in. And the Seidners family, that a lot of them lived down on Oakdale, South Oakdale. Seidners, she was a teacher. Roger, her son, was a minister of the Union Church. And Bob grew up with Roger. Frank Chase and the Chase family. I don't know a lot about them, but Bob used to tell the story about going down. And Eddie may tell you this, that they'd go down there at night on Sunday night and listen to the gospel. At the very end of Oakdale, they would sneak under there and listen to the gospel, because they had quarters for their pickers, workers, and they lived down there, and they would sing gospel stuff, and they'd go down there and listen to all this. A lot of this, like I said, is hearsay from Bob that he had told me on a lot of that. The kids here all did that. Bob rode his horse. They used to ride horses here in town. Bob would ride his horse all through our Craig's father he said, sure, go ahead. And they'd ride. Bob had a Model A. He'd ride it on the railroad tracks, clear to Bay Hill and back. Because used to, a train would come through here at 3 p.m. every day to go down to Chase's to pick up fruit and stuff. But you could set your watch 3 o'clock. That train came through town. And Bob's mother would tell you the story that the only phone in town was at that little station here in town for the railroad. And they'd go there to use the phone. There was not one around. Going back to my house, I've got paperwork, a little cookbook that tells when the house got electricity, when it got gas, when it got water. That, for years, she didn't have any of that. And then when they brought it in, she wrote all this down in a cookbook that I still have. But there's a lot of those, I think. Bob Ferdinand's building, he had the upper top, and Judy Platt had a doctor's office in the bottom, and she was there for a long time. A local doctor, just general. And then where the art room used to be a lumber yard. I don't remember it, but that was a lumber yard there. And then where the Paramore House used to be, they had a small building, kind of like Rania's Pistols, that kind of building. And there was a beauty shop for Mrs. Carmichael and a barber shop there. And then when those got sold, then that's when the Paramore House was built. Because it I don't know if Paramore's may have owned that property. Bob had a horse pen lot on down Oakdale at the very end. That last lot on the left on the lake is where he kept his horse. And after his father passed away, his mom didn't think she could afford it, and she sold that lot for $6,000.
So that because nobody's really described like where where people went into the Isleworth Grove and whatnot, or Chase Grove at the time. So it was all the way down Oakdale past 13th. I guess that's kind of the last
13th?
street. Yeah,
Yeah,
against
the
wall
last
there.
the last lot on the left. Then
Right.
after that was the Chase Groves.
Right.
What you call the Chase Groves.
Right.
And of course they've, unfortunately, when they sold that, Mr. and Mrs. Chase had a house there that was absolutely beautiful, but it was an old house, and the inside was all cedar and stuff, beautiful stuff. And they had to keep that until she passed away. And then after she passed away, it got torn down. But Bob lived here, his aunt lived here, Craig Lee and them lived here. And then you could go this way in the Seidners, and these are all old families that were Windermere families, the Chases. And back then, everybody knew everybody. Craig's dad was a great postmaster, just a great postmaster. We all just loved. But you could go into the post office and they knew who you were. And back then, you didn't have mailboxes at home. Everything, you got your mail at the post office. You didn't get home delivery. And when they showed up at my house, maybe 5-6 years ago, and told me I could put a box there, I said, you got to be kidding me. I thought we all had to have boxes. And she said, no. And so we put up a mailbox. But normally you went to the post office to get your mail. No one had. And you go someplace and they'd ask for your address. And I said, are you going to mail it? Or are you not going to mail it? If you're not going to mail it, I'll give you the address. If you're going to mail it, it won't get to me. They'll return it to you. And that's what they did. I had many bills that they put a street address on it and it never got to me because of that. They returned it.
My name is Jane Kennedy. My maiden name was Kernahan, and my grandparents, uh, Clifford and Joanna Walker, moved here in the 30s from Cleveland, came down to visit Grace Karen, who was also from Cleveland, and just fell in love with it. And they bought the greenhouse down on 9th and Main, which was a big old Florida home that was built to take advantage of the winds because there wasn't any air conditioning. And but you could open the windows and a breeze was always around, except maybe in August. So you wanted a storm in August. Anyway, so my mother, my father, and my 3 siblings came down in for Christmas of 1950 from Ohio. My mother refused to go back. She said, I'm not going back to that snow and ice. And she always got her way. So Daddy went up, sold the house, packed up, and Daddy came back. So, and he worked in real estate when nobody was buying real estate. And he tried to talk my grandfather, who had money, into buying groves, buying land. No. So we did not become rich. Anyway, but we rented a house on 2nd Avenue, the hippie house. Remember that? It had 5 bedrooms, a 1 bathroom. It was perfect for us. It had woods and groves. We had access to the lake because of Terry Geyer's grandmother. She let us swim at her dock. And so until we moved into the greenhouse after my grandfather died, that's where we swam. Then we were on the greenhouse was on Lake Butler. Most beautiful view. My father traveled for a living, and his territory, he sold Titleist golf balls. And so he was gone from April to the beginning of November. And then he was home because they don't play golf in the wintertime in Ohio, which was his first territory, or Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire, which was where he ended up. But at the time when we moved here, he sold real estate. My grandfather had a horse, a big old Palomino that, as I said, would blow out his belly. I'd put my foot in the stirrup and go boom. He scared me a bit. Her husband got the horse that I loved, but I was glad he stayed in Windermere. So that was a wonderful horse. Windermere was fun to be a kid in. You had the lakes. You knew to come home when the church bells rang at 6. Now, my mom was a late sleeper. She was never up before 11 o'clock. Okay. And so, if I didn't want to go to school, I'd just stay home. And mother would be too embarrassed to say, so she would always, Jane was sick. So, but we would get up when it wasn't school. We would get up, we would have a peanut butter sandwich, and we would be out the door, and we wouldn't be home till the church bells rang, and nobody worried. I love John Neighbor's description, latchkey kids. I mean, we didn't even have a lock on our door, so you couldn't lock the window. It had a skeleton key. That's not very secure. I was lucky to grow up here. It was very carefree. When we were living on 2nd Avenue in the hippie house, we all had our own bedroom. And, we would play in the woods. We would run through the groves, go swimming. We had friends around. Not many. My graduating class from Windermere Elementary was 10 people. And when I was growing up, there was Betty Foote, Elizabeth Jones, Nancy Grunland, and me. We were the only girls. And then Linda Kinsey came, I think, about the 5th grade. So we ended up with 5. Now, I couldn't tell you the boys, except for Mike Conley. So, and he and I did something at elementary school graduation, reading some story. I don't remember, but I remember being up on that stage and with Mike giggling. I loved to read, and we had the bookmobile, which came once every 2 weeks, I think. And the librarian and I were very close. So, I mean, and I was just this little kid, but I would come home with a stack of books, and she would put some aside for me, and so always the library was an important thing. And I think we had the bookmobile till I went away to college, and then we had a library, but there weren't. When I went away to college, went to Florida, I would be home for holidays, and I ended up going year round to school because I really only wanted to take about 13 hours or 11 or something. I wasn't in a hurry to graduate. But so I wasn't here. And then when my father had the Ohio territory, my parents are from Ohio, so we would go up to Ohio for the summers, starting when I was about 12 or 13. And so I never got in trouble here, because summer's when you got in trouble, and I wasn't here. So I had a whole new life in Ohio for the summer. I was a new kid on the block. So anyway, with a Southern accent. So I wasn't here for all the boating and all the skiing. So I learned to ski, but it was never something I was comfortable with.
You lived on the lake.
I lived on the lake. I was a great swimmer. I loved to swim. And I was just in North Carolina at Lake Lure, Diane, my sister-in-law's cabin. And I've been up there a million times. I've said, I don't want to go in the lake. I don't want to go in the lake. My daughter and I went up, and my daughter said, we're going in the lake. And I got in the lake. I forgot how heavenly a lake is. A clean lake. I mean, Lake Butler, you could see the bottom from the middle of the lake. It was that clear. When we lived on 2nd Avenue in the hippie house, our water was piped from the lake. We used to have to take the thingy off of the faucet and clear the seaweed. So, yeah. But it was great water, So we never worried about it. Washing your hair in the lake, oh, that was the most special thing in the world. So, but being in the lake again just flooded me with how much I love that lake. I miss that every day.
On 2nd Avenue, did you know, was it Bill Wagner's
Oh,
grandmother that owned?
Yeah, Miss Schlesinger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she was part of the oil company, mistaken.
I don't really know. She was an old lady. I mean, I knew Ken and Billy. I mean, I
But
grew
the
up with them.
Schlesinger, she was,
She was divorced.
yeah, but she had she was heir to an oil company up north, but I don't know.
I don't know
Which
which
one?
one. She and my grandmother were
I think it was
friends.
Standard Oil. I'm not
Well,
mistaken.
Standard Oil was the big one then.
Yeah,
So that
I
would
think
make
it was
sense.
Standard Oil.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that the people we were talking about is Mac Riles and Susie Riles.
Yeah.
She was the one that nobody knew it was a woman.
Oh,
He
right.
dressed like a
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. So she was not Canal Annie,
No,
because it was Susie
I
Riles.
don't want to, I don't know about Canal Annie. I've heard some stories. but
And
it's not a
Susie
story you want to
Riles,
tell.
Susie Riles lived out on the corner of 6th and Conroy and Apopka Vineland, little tiny house there on the right-hand side as you're going out of town.
Wasn't there a honky tonk up there or something?
No, I don't know about that.
Them talked about someplace up there that.
Well, we had the funny little place here on the corner of Main and Sixth.
The Little Dive, I've heard about
The
it.
little dive and it pinball machines and
Got any
Go in
fond
there.
memories of that?
well, just sitting in there smoking. You know? No, I spent most of my life, you're restricted, go to your room. So that was a good thing I read. So my father would catch me smoking. Oh
I
God.
haven't heard about this place.
On the corner of Main and Sixth. There was a little white house.
I think it was called,
Paramore's was on the other
is
side.
Majo's?
Yes, Majo's.
Oh, Monjo's, I thought was at the corner of Apopka Vineland.
No, that was Susie
Oh, I've heard
Riles.
about Monjo's.
Yeah, that was Susie Riles that was up in
Because,
that corner.
okay, then it must have been next to the barber shop in Carmichael. Beauty shop.
Wasn't that in town?
Yeah, but where you're talking about
Majo's was on the corner
of Sixth and
and
Apopka Vineland.
on Sixth and Main.
I'm confused.
It's right there where
So it
they're
was
building.
it was described to me as where the Susie Carr Realty building was, which
Yeah.
before
Oh,
yeah,
so
yeah,
before
that's
that
the
it
building.
was the bank.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I guess there must have been a building prior to the bank.
Yeah. The thing that I love about Windermere, and I have lived here most of my life. I've been in and out. I've built and owned 2 homes here. Lost them both, divorced. And the last time I had to move out of town because when I was divorced the first time, Lisa's father, I bought Bobby Williams, the house that he grew up in early. He was early there.
Is that 7th and Oakdale?
7th and Oakdale. I was very much in love with Oakdale Street. I lived in 3 places on Oakdale
I
Street.
think Bob and them did too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they lived way down.
Yeah, Andy
Later,
built that
that's
house
where-
down
yeah.
there.
But I thought Andy built the little house on
Yeah.
7th and
Yeah.
Oakdale.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful little house. I bought that house for $27,000.
So there's 2 smaller houses on that corner. There's a vacant lot, right? And then there's a house, a smaller house there, and smaller. Is it either
No,
one
it's
of
been
those?
torn down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So maybe
Was I-
Torn down, built.
Oh.
Yeah, I tore it down to build a bigger house
Okay.
for my second husband.
Because the first lady that was there, she tutored,
Mrs. Winkler?
yes.
The Winklers lived there.
She-
Yeah,
Tutored my brother
yeah.
in something, but.
When we bought the house, there was a shelf all the way around, just full of liquor bottles. Whoa, somebody did some drinking. Anyway, but I love that little house,
Yeah.
but it wasn't big enough for my second husband, so we tore it down. A year later, he was gone. I couldn't afford the new house. So that was the last property I
It was
owned.
across from John Neighbors, wasn't it? No,
John
it's
Neighbors
more
was
down.
1 block
Yeah.
closer to Maine. Yeah. And I grew up on 9th and Main. So I just kind of stayed in the area
Did Paul York have the house across?
across the
from it?
street.
Okay.
Yeah. And Angie lived there. And of course, Angie and Lisa were my daughter. So it was, growing up was fun. I always figured I'd live here again, but by the time I couldn't afford it.
Can't afford it.
So, I moved out and I finally ended up buying a little house in Gotha. I would come back and live with mother here and there. And
Because your brother had a house across the street.
across the
from you.
street from the lake house. Yeah. And eventually my mom and dad sold the greenhouse but kept half the property. It was a pretty piece of property. And Bobby has a railing. It's on his house from the greenhouse. And I have a window
You know,
Yes.
this desk here is made from the old schoolhouse
Mhm.
property.
Oh,
It's the floor joists.
the school was just
Yeah, this is
wonderful. The school we had when first of all, I started school a year early because my mom lied about how old I was. She changed my birth date. So I could start school because remember the reader? So, and mom had 4 kids, stair step. So Marv he started in first grade. Well, I started in whatever was they had before. Or maybe I started in first grade. It could be first grade. But my grandmother was a friend of Jessie Seidner, the principal, and she said her birth certificate is in a safety deposit box in Cleveland. Her birth date is December 10th, 45. So I was able to start school. So I was always the youngest in my class. And, somewhere around the 8th grade, I discovered, that I was actually born January 10th. So it was just a month. But to keep me home when I was and I never had a problem with school. So learning wasn't a problem for me or maturity. I matured early.
Yeah.
So
Is your brother's house still there? What is at the corner of
Oakdale and
Main?
Main and 8th. It's right
Main
across the
or
street.
Ninth?
9th. Main
Ninth.
and 9th.
It's the house, Chris, that sits up.
Sits up. Every other year, I was in the same classroom with my brother. And so, and I ended up, that was the class that I had friends with when I was in high school, was my brother's class. And so when they all went to college, I thought I was going to die. Anyway, elementary school, there are a couple of things in elementary school, but the biggest thing was the lunches. We had what's the hamburger thing? Sloppy Joe's on real mashed potatoes. I mean, these people made real food. It was just amazing. And desserts and stuff. The other thing growing up here, the town hall, we called it the Civic Club. And once a month, there was a dinner at the Civic Club, a potluck dinner. And, we all went. So the whole town, I mean, we were only 250 people until Martin Marietta opened. And that's when the extension of Oakdale Street to the canal came. And we had an influx of people. But it still was small. My brother raised his children here. I raised my daughter here. Marv's children raised their children here. And Lisa never had kids, but they will all tell you, each of them, even though the town had changed and grown and everything, that this was the best place ever to grow up. All right. Of course, that, past 12, that was where the Grove workers and our maids and
Tell
our
me about that.
yard
Everybody
people.
has a story about that. And it was only today I found the end of Oakdale was kind of the entry point to where everybody went to hear some gospel. So you got any memories
Yes,
of that?
exactly. But I think it was Main Street that went down there because when we went to take our maid home, we went straight down Main Street and went in. And a lot of the men worked in the packing house, but everybody had a yard man that came from there. Everybody had a maid that came. I mean, we paid Mary $5 a week, and she would come into that 2-story greenhouse with hardwood floors, clean those floors every 2 weeks, change the beds for all of us, do all of our laundry, vacuum, do everything. $5. I mean, that's embarrassing. So, but we loved Mary. She came to my wedding. So, and she did for me when I lived in the little house on Oakdale Street. But, and when the packing house wasn't doing anything, we kids went down and broke into the packing house, played around in there. If there was a vacant house, we got in. I mean, I think some of us would have ended up in juvenile homes, if we'd been caught. But it was so easy out here. And you just call the parents or Mr. Knight, who drove the Corvair. Yeah. He was the town police. And he would catch me driving without a license, of course, because I did that on a regular basis. And when he came, Mr. Kernahan, she's driving again. Because I learned to drive. All this boy would take me driving, and it was a stick shift, so I always knew how to do a stick, which is I made my daughter learn stick shift. I said, I don't want any time you having to say, oh, I can't drive that car. Anyway, but we would go out Chase Road, we would go out 545, and it was nothing, just groves and woods. Wonderful place to grow up.
I'm Doug Fay. Me and my brother and mom and dad and my oldest brother moved here in 1957. I was 6 years old, and we moved from New York. Dad had asthma, and his doctors told him he ought to get out of the cold weather. So we took off for Arizona and ended up in Windermere somehow. Neither one of us know really why, or how, but we ended up in Windermere, and we lived on the other side of Lake Butler for 2 weeks when we got here. And then we moved on Butler Street. And then we went 2 or 3 places around town. And then Dad finally bought a house at the corner of Fifth and Butler. And that's where we were raised. And I ended up buying that house from him. I lived there about 10 years, and then I bought the house next to that house about 40 years ago. So I grew up, my whole life has been at the corner of Fifth and Butler. It's been great. It was a great place to grow up. We didn't have Little League, and we didn't have Pop Warner, and we didn't have anything organized. We just, our whole life was centered around the lake. I mean, we built all our own skis and stuff like that. And it was a great place to grow up. I mean, we never felt endangered or anything like that. We were all over town at 8 years old. We could go ride our bikes anywhere we wanted to, and never had a problem. And it was fun. They had some organized things where we had a youth center that went on for a while, and then we had square dancing. Let's see, Joe Johnson, he was the square dance caller, and that was fun for all us kids to learn how to square dance. It was a great place to grow up. Everybody kind of hung out at Johnny's store, which is right there on the corner of Fifth and Butler. Johnny's Country Store. I mean, they had hamburgers and they had great food, and everybody get off the bus, and that's where we'd go. We'd go to Johnny's Country Store. There wasn't a whole lot of kids around, or were mostly old people that came from up north and spent the winter here, and that's what most of the town was made up of. But we also had potluck dinners, I think every month or maybe every Thursday, but we had a lot of potluck dinners, and everybody got to meet everybody, and we had real good Boy Scout troop, Cub Scout troops. We had all that was fun for us boys, and we started a ski club and that kind of stuff. That was a little later on. There was always Ron Welty owned a golf cart shop, and we hung around there for something to do nothing dangerous or anything with the carts, but, and then I worked there for a little while, but not very long, when I was like 12 or 13, doing odd jobs. Oh, yeah, out of the, we used to make, down by the Palmer Park, there was a hill there, and we would all make our own little push cars out of the wheels that we got from Ron Welty from the golf carts, and we'd ride down that hill. There would a bunch of us get together and do that. And that was a lot of fun. You know, everything that we did was about the lake, you know.
Let's expand on that. Maybe you're a skier or a skier, and you said you made skis. So
Yeah, we made our own, and we used to use tabletops, which was about a 4 or 3 foot diameter round circle where you just sit on it, and you could, have fights with people on the tabletops. That was always fun. And we had ski shows that we put on, and some of us, we started a ski club, and some of us got where we skied competitively. And that took some time. I was a little older then. I was probably 18 or 19 then. But
so nobody's brought up the ski shows. Tell me about that, where they were, and
well,
that type of thing.
we would take it down to the Sportsman Club on Lake Sheen, and we'd fly the kites, the hang gliders, and just barefoot and just do silly things, put a tabletop on the top, or a step ladder on top of the tabletop, and stand on top of that, and just stuff like that. Not quite like Cypress Gardens, but it was fun.
Windermere Cypress Gardens. Huh?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Were most of the skiers from Windermere, or kind of all along the chain
No,
there?
there's all
Yeah.
mostly Windermere people. Yeah.
And why down at the Sportsman Park area? Just because of
We were yeah, it was a big open place, and I mean a bunch of people came and stuff. And we had a ski jump. We made slalom courses, of course, and then we bought a ski jump and learned how to jump and that kind of stuff. And that was down by Chase Road that way. And that was always fun, but that just kind of went away. Gas got hard to get there in the early 70s. And that was a fun time. Jerry and I played, we didn't play a lot together. He was 2 years older than I was, so he had his own little friends, and we had ours, and we'd play marbles in the dirt road and stuff like that. I would do that a lot, and just ride our bikes all over the place. We were fine.
I presume you also went to school where the admin building is currently sitting now. Is there anything that you can reflect on that?
The school where we are sitting right here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I started in the 2nd grade, and my 3rd and 4th grade was combined. It was 3rd graders and 4th graders because we didn't have enough kids, and it was fine. I wasn't a very good student, but it was fine. I didn't really like school very much, but we would have kickball where we had a kickball team, and then Gotha school, they'd send their whole school over, because that's about their whole school made up a team, and because there were very few people in their school. And I can remember that was a lot of fun. We did that every year. We had a real good Boy Scout troop. Jerry went to Lenoche. I never went to Camp Lenoche, but he did that a couple of times.
In that chapter met here.
Mm-hmm.
So it was in Windermere, your Boy Scout troop, not the troop, I guess.
It actually met in the attic of our building over here. Yeah. Have you ever been in the attic?
No, I can see stuff through the window. It's full of stuff, but
no, that's where we held our Boy Scout meetings, and then we built my dad helped build the Boy Scout place that I don't know, it's tore down now. It's where they were going to put the pavilion. That's where it was there.
That was a community room that was there. It used to be a library, I believe, a
No,
community room.
this was another building.
Oh, okay. So not the one they torn down. There was another building there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And our scout leader, he was a builder and he built it, and my dad helped build it and stuff. But the train would come through. They'd give us a ride down to Chase Road. They'd pick us up here. We'd get on the train and we'd go down. They'd let us off the Chase Road before they got back into Islesworth. But that was fun. Yeah, big for us. I mean, that's all. Never saw trains, but it was good.
So the conductor, the engineer would actually he would know you guys were on
Oh
there,
yeah,
and
yeah.
then
They just stop. They pick us up and take off and let us off down at Chase Road, or before you went through the gate to Iowa.
Any experiences with the Grove itself, maybe the Chase Grove in particular, or
The Groves?
yeah. Mhm.
Well, we used to fire them.
Mhm.
Yeah, we used to fire the Groves. Mary Francis's dad, actually.
Mhm.
That's who we worked for when it got real cold. We'd go out there, and we started out with tires, burning tires, which that got kind of messy. And then we went to the pots, and we did well with that. It was fun.
So that would be your winter job, I guess, when it got
Yeah,
to the
only
cold. So.
maybe once every 2 years when it got real cold. But
So what about the typical summer job for teenagers or whatever at that time?
Jerry worked at Johnny's Country Store. I never did. I did work at Welty's golf cart shop, but not much. It was we just played on the lake. We had our neighbors. They have it was a camp for them. It was the young bloods. They had a camp, and they would rent it out during the winter, and in the summer they lived in Winter Garden, and they would live at the camp in the summertime, and they were both real close to our age, and they had 2 boys, and we played with them all the time in the lake. And one other thing was the church always had the chimes go off at 6 o'clock, and that was our alarm clock to get home, and that always that was great. But when the Disney people moved in, it wasn't bad. It was just more people.
Is that when you started seeing more full-time residents maybe about that time? Because you said when you
Oh,
had
yeah.
first come
Yeah.
here with snowbirds and things like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they'd sell their small house to somebody, and it would be a big house when it was done.
Right.
Yeah, my first house was Judy Black lives there now, right down by Palmer Park. That was our first house. We paid $15,000 for it.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. That was my wife and I. That's where and our 2 kids were born there, and when we moved away. Yeah, it's still better than 99% of the places to grow up in. And,
Right.
all my kids have grown. I got 7 grandkids and 2 great grandkids that live real close. So yeah. My grandkids live well, I could throw a baseball to both of them. They're right next door. One of them, the other one's a block away. So school was fine. We went to Lakeview after, we went through 6th grade here, and then we went to Lakeview, and I got transferred my sophomore year. After that, I had to go to Ocoee High School because that's when they had all the forced busing, where you had if you were going to play sports, you had to go to the school that you were assigned to. So I went to Ocoee to finish up high school. Have you spoke with Eddie Foote yet?
I believe Friday.
My Joe's came on the corner where they're building a new building right now. It was right there on the corner, and it was just a little dive, and it had pinball machines in it. There was 2 different gas stations. It was Paramore's,
Mm-hmm.
and then Vern Riker had the Chevron station. built a new Chevron station there. So Paramore's was one that we grew up with, and
Mhm.
I'm sure told people talked to you about Uni, where she'd add everything up on. Okay.
Nope. Tell me the story about the two corners then, the
Okay,
Paramore and then
okay.
also these
Uni-
pinballs.
Uni and Perry, they owned just a store there with a gas station and stuff. And they had real good meat. You could buy anything you want. They had real good meat and everything there and fresh goods. But Uni would write everything down. She gave you a paper bag every time. Gave me paper bags in. She'd write the price of everything down on the paper bag. And then in about 5 seconds, she'd have it all added up. And she I mean, like this, you could have 15 different items and she'd have it all added up. And it was just in no time at all. Eddie will tell you about that probably too. But she was great. That was a big deal. Man, go up to Uni and get a bunch of stuff and watch her add it up. And it was always right. You know, you take the bag home and add it up. Oh, she was right. But it was a nice little store. They had, they had everything you wanted. I mean, we used to buy our meat up there, hamburger and stuff, and all our gas. I remember gas was 29 cents a gallon. We go up and get it. We had a Volkswagen. We go up and get $1 worth, and that'd hold us all week. And the other corner was Ma Joe's. And I don't know. I don't know what went on there other than they had pinball machines. And that was a pretty big deal for everybody. I didn't go in there a whole lot, but a friend of ours went in there and he had saved up $5 just from, allowances, $5. So he went to Ma Joe's and he spent all his $5 on the pinball machines. And his mom found out about it and she came back down and got his $5 back. Yeah. But it was just a little dive. I don't know I don't even think they served food or anything. It was just go in there and play pinball machines.
But that was eventually torn down and then the Winter Park
Then the
loan
bank
and savings or whatever it was.
The bank went in and then Susie
Mhm.
took over the other thing. Higginbotham, Carl Higginbotham, he was our realtor. No, he was the insurance guy. And, we just that whole strip there, we'd all just kind of hang around that whole strip and because the post office was there as well.
Okay, at the time it was
Yeah, right there.
right there.
Right there on the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was the general store at one point too, or
Well, that's where Johnny Luss
right.
Johnny Luss store was.
Right.
And that was he
Yeah,
had everything in there that you'd ever, had real good food and stuff, but, we had some characters. The shuffleboard court, that was a big deal here.
Nobody's talked about it yet. I've heard about it. And
all the people that came down from up north, they had a big shuffleboard club there, and it's where the little basketball court is now, not where the tennis court is, but there was a tennis court there. And a lot of people played tennis but in shuffleboard, they had big lights up and everything. They did play shuffleboard in the evenings and stuff. That was all the older people. We went up there and played, but probably weren't supposed to. We had a race car driver that lived next to us. His name was Art Huttinger, and he was a race car driver and a good one. And had who Roger Penske is?
Hmm.
He used to come over there and they'd go skiing all the time. Yeah. But Art was, I think they kept saying he had the first car that would go 200 miles an hour. And it just parked, it's right next to my house now. Yeah. Where Pasilas lived right next to me. It was right there. And I went for a ride and Mom wouldn't let me go very far in it, but he'd take me for a ride in it. It was fun. We built a bomb shelter. It's at the corner. It's 5th and Butler, but I'm on this side now, and it's right there. And we built a bomb shelter when the Cuban Missile Crisis was going on. Dad said, well, we better have bomb shelter. So us three boys went out there and we dug, it's about the size, not maybe half the size of this room here. And built a bomb shelter, had big air vent, pumped air in it. And there's 2 or 3 of those around town, I think.
Yeah, for I can't remember who I asked. Maybe it was John. But I'd heard rumors there were some bomb shelters around town, so you were one of them
Yeah,
that built them. It's still there today, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. In fact, my neighbor that built the new house, I live right at the end of Butler Street.
Mhm.
And if you keep going, I mean, right at the end of Fifth Street, Fifth and Butler, if you keep going, she built that house, a real nice big house next to me, and then she bought the house that we grew up in. And we're good friends with her, and she didn't even know it had a bomb shelter. I had to show her. She won't go down in it because it's kind of spooky down here, you know, just damp. It's a good place to people to keep their wine.
Right.
Well, my name is Elise Rutledge Bradford, and my husband and I moved to Windermere in 1964, expecting our first child in September, who's Rob Bradford. We looked diligently for a lot or a house to buy. And we had a wonderful realtor. Can't think of his name. What was his name?
Would be Johnny Love.
Short and gray hair. And he took us everywhere. We went to Bay Hill and we saw all these lots that were white sand and hot in July, as you can imagine. And I was 7 months pregnant and thought, I can't stand this place. I could not make anything out of this. So we went back to the Windermere area and things were much more attractive. We ended up buying a lot at 535 West 2nd Avenue, owned by a deaf lady and her husband, who was a retired military dentist. And it had an informal garden, which happened to be my hobby. So we bought that lot and we started our family. And all the roads, of course, in Windermere were dirt except for 2nd Avenue. And we would walk with our baby carriages up and down 2nd Avenue with our children, and all of our friends would do the same. And we would meet in the afternoons before nap time and usually have lunch outdoors in the park on 2nd Avenue or in one or the other's yard in the winter. And in the summer, we always gathered at somebody's home on the lake and had lunch there. But the dirt roads were wonderful experiences for all of us. We loved it. I enjoyed biking, and I had a bike seat on the front and the back of my bike for my first 2 children, and I had to give up for the third and go alone. So we were happy when they built the bridge over the canal between Lake Down and Wassian Bay. Before we built our home, we rented a home at the corner of North Drive and First. And a wonderful woman lived across the street sideways from me named Alice Marshall. And she was one of the oldest residents of Windermere. She was born in this country, but grew up in India. And she was sort of like the grandmother, or not the grandmother. She wasn't that much older, maybe 12 years older than most of the young girls that were with us and our children. We would listen to stories about India, and she would teach all the young children to swim. She was a wonderful teacher. in about 1968, maybe 2 years later, 1970, I was driving home from Main Street on 2nd Avenue. And one of my horrors are snakes. And there was the most mammoth diamondback rattlesnake across the street right in front of me. I went ahead and I ran over it with my eyes closed, my hands over my face, my foot on the brake, and my 2 children in the car. I was screaming, and they were screaming and crying. As the car rolled on, I had stunned this huge snake, and I called Jack Jowett, who was a rather brave friend of ours. And he did go and finished killing the snake and took it to a taxidermist, and it did measure 6 feet 2 inches. And it had come out of the grove on 2nd Avenue that was across from what we called the hippie house. It was later, I think it was a sort of a, I don't remember if it was an inn, but it was torn down. It was a rather odd looking wooden haunted house. Like it was torn down and an architect built a home there, which is on 2nd Avenue now. And it's been owned by a couple of people since then. But the snake had come out of the west side where there was a grove and across the street. So I do remember that vividly.
So the hippie, so was that the Roboy's house by chance? Was it a
No,
green?
Ramirez was
Okay.
further down on the
Okay.
left. And that, they looked alike. As
Okay.
old,
Okay. Like, yeah, like a craftsman style.
and she was a
two-story.
character,
Yes.
real character. This morning, Bob Ployce's house is right across the street from mine. Did you know Bob?
I did not know him.
Wonderful.
I know the house.
But we're right across the street from
Okay.
where Bob was. He was a good neighbor.
So that bridge was built then, I guess late 60s? Is that
Probably.
okay?
And we rode we being 5 bikers, Ginger Jackson, Eileen Swatkowski, Trish Denson, Virginia Robinson, myself, and later Karen Fay, Gail Carroll, did I say her name? There were usually 5 of us, and we rode our bikes every morning. We would meet at the end of 2nd Avenue, and we would ride parallel to Main Street, up over the walking bridge, down Butler, around the bend, back in front of the school, make a loop, and go retreat our steps. And we left at 10 after 7 in the morning and got home about 8 o'clock. So that was once our children were older and could go to school on their own. So that was a wonderful period. And I just quit maybe 5 years ago. There's still 2 bikers riding part-time and not as far, but that was a wonderful period. To go back to when the children were little, all of our birthday parties were at the lake. And it was a big deal to carry everything down to the lake. And as soon as they were old enough, we would do the skiing and pulling them behind the boats skiing. All the kids learned to ski quickly and easily. One of the fun things we did at night was to take the boat out with our husbands and the children and shine the lights on the gator eyes on the other side of Lake Butler. And that was always a fun thing to do at night. Let's go shine light eyes, Daddy. that was a fun thing to do.
So that would have been clear on the other side of Lake Butler, I guess the Kelso area now?
Yes, the
Okay.
Kelso area, yeah, which was pretty much unsettled.
Mm-hmm. Couple fish camps maybe
Yeah,
or something like
exactly,
that.
exactly.
Anything you remember about the downtown area, the business district or the town hall or
Oh,
any memories
the
from there?
post office. We all went to the post office. This just was a coincidence, but my street address was 535, but my telephone was 407-876-2557. My mailbox number was 257, and my cell phone was 407-701-2557. But I kept that mailbox for a long time. The mailbox was downtown at first, and you would see everybody at the mailbox. Nobody had home delivery. So every day you would meet your friends at the mailbox. There was a wonderful ready market where we could pick up a loaf of bread. It was so convenient. But they had these machines that the children play.
The pinball machines, I've heard about them.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Kind of like a pinball, but they're little.
Okay.
And my youngest son, just got in trouble because he would take all the change around the house and go up there and play the pinball machines. Well, one day he came to me and he said, "Mom, I am a thief." I said, "You're a thief? What have you done?" He said, "I have stolen all the change all over the house to play the pinball machines. And today I realized I held the record on every single machine." And I was so ashamed. That memory just came back. And I said, "Well, thank you for telling me." He said, "I think my punishment should be to put me on lifetime restriction from the ready market." That's a cute story. But Johnny's Country Store was fabulous.
Yeah.
Fabulous. It was the next corner. I have to think about east and west and north and south. It was Fifth Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a large hardware store. It had anything you wanted, you could get there. And it had a restaurant. And we used to eat the hamburgers, the best hamburgers in the world at Johnny's. And that was a very popular place, fabulous place. You could find any size screw or nail or anything else. And he was such a great guy. It was Luff, Johnny Luff. The children all went to Windermere kindergarten, which was in the Windermere Union Church. And we had to sign up early to get our place reserved. And that was a fun place. It was a good school. At one point, I was chairman of the school for about 5 years. And that was a great experience. Joe Barton was a wonderful director. It was so great to be able to drop your kids off there and know they were going to be safe. We never locked our house, ever, until maybe got to be up to I'd say 1985. We had to start locking our houses.
What changed then?
Well, there were gypsies that would come through town, and I was robbed once. But I was locked when it happened. But they cut a screen lakeside big enough to put a child through and open my door. And they stole all my sterling silver and some jewelry. That was a sad situation. It was sad when the post office moved to Conroy Road. That was its very sad day. And it was a sad day when the Ready Market closed. Mm-hmm. And now we have a brewery and a good restaurant and some other little shops. It'll be so interesting to see the finished result of the new buildings that are going up.
Mm.
Oh, we had a wonderful gas station on the corner, with a really wonderful family running it. And it was a good place to get gas. It was a very fair price. And that was on the corner of 6th Conroy Road in Maine. That was very convenient.